Welcome to the Veterinary Rehabilitation Podcast, where we aim to help fellow veterinary rehab therapists increase their knowledge and elevate their practice. I'm Megan Kelly.
And I'm Anae Lloyd. Together, we bring you the latest insights, research, and information in the field of veterinary rehabilitation.
This podcast is brought to you by Onlinepethealth, a leading continuing education membership for veterinary rehabilitation therapists. With Onlinepethealth, you'll have access to a wide range of online resources to help you stay up to date with the latest techniques, advances, and trends in the industry.
Our podcast features in-depth conversations with leading experts in veterinary rehabilitation. They share their own experiences and knowledge to help you improve your practice. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out in the field, our goal is to provide you with the tools and the insights you need to succeed.
So join us as we explore the exciting world of veterinary rehabilitation and help you take your practice to the next level.
Hey, vet rehabbers. Hiring your first or maybe your next team member can be both exciting but also a little bit nerve-wracking. Now, expanding your practice comes with big decisions, and one of the biggest questions you'll face is who to hire first, administrative staff or clinical staff. In today's episode, it is a revisit of one of our business basics with Francisco Maia about the real costs and benefits of hiring. He breaks down if you can actually afford to hire someone, what the numbers say, and what to consider before making the leap. Who should come first, admin versus clinical staff, and how each role affects the trajectory of your practice. He also talks about how to ensure your hire leads to more revenue and long-term sustainability. So if you're feeling stretched thin and unsure whether hiring is the right next move for you, this episode is packed with insights to help you make a confident decision. If you're not a member already, our amazing online community of vet rehabbers from all over the world gathers in our Facebook groups. If you haven't joined yet, you can head over to Facebook and request to be a part of our action. Our groups include small animal vet rehabbers, equine vet rehabbers, hydro vet rehabbers, and our business vet rehabbers for those juggling patient care and running your own practices. We regularly share tips, advice, and host live sessions with experts to support you on your vet rehab journey. A quick word from our sponsor before we dive in. At Paw Prosper, we believe true pet well-being demands a three-pronged approach: prevention, support, and rehabilitation. Our brands are trusted by veterinarians, universities, and rehab facilities alike. So whether you're looking to train, rehabilitate, or help your pets age gracefully, our brands Walking Pets, Help 'em Up, Response System, Fit Paws, Muffins Halo, Sleepy Pod, and Canine Carts offer effective, innovative, and proven solutions. You can sign up today to receive a one-time special gift for all our podcast listeners with your next order. So you can head over to the special link, pawprosper.com/OPH. Right, let's dive in with Francisco Maia.
Thank you so much, Megan Kelly and the Online Pet Health team, for another opportunity to be teaching some of the business courses, basics for the Online Pet Health group. Today's or this month or whenever it is that you're watching this, we're going to be focusing on hiring new staff. And the main question I am keeping in mind when teaching you the content for today is, can you afford it? Okay. Hiring new staff, can you afford it? So let's talk a little bit about it first, okay? Because I go back to when I was hiring my first staff, and I'm recording this, it's June of 2023, and it's basically going to be a little bit over 3 years. So my first staff I hired was actually, I started the process of hiring the spring of 2019, so I guess 4 years, spring of 2019, but then that person actually started in the June of 2019 with us, and then since then, have grown to a team of 8 individuals with our clinic, and along the way, had to also hire people that didn't work out, fire some people, let go, some people moved on to other things, that all stuff that we know it kind of like happens, right? And I think hiring my first employee out of all those ones might have been the most challenging one, not from a perspective of actually get that ROI or anything like that, but in terms of figuring out how to go about it, okay? And I think the reason behind it is because that's probably the most uncomfortable one. It's like the very first one. It just feels like very uncomfortable to take that initial step, suddenly from going from a business that it's being just us, just trying to figure out how to go about this, to now, adding someone to the business. And not saying that it's a process that it ever gets super easy. There's always its challenges kind of stuff. but that has been something that I've been able to, through the years, learn a little bit more and upon reflection and figured out why is it that we feel so uncomfortable, okay? And it is something that we need to figure out how to overcome, no matter if you're first, your 10th, or your 100th employee, so that way you can keep your business growing beyond just yourself. So that way you're not chained to the business. That way the business doesn't just revolve around you, okay? So then the question becomes, what holds us back from actually doing so? What holds us back from hiring someone? And like I said, it can be the first hire, but it can be whatever other hire afterwards, okay? And what I've realized is that there are basically 4 things that basically tend to hold us back when it comes to it. The first one is the fear in regards the process of itself, but then also the fear of failure, most importantly. You know, it's kind of like, okay, but what if I hire someone and it does not work? Okay, that's probably one of the things I hear the most, you know, especially for the first employee, the first hire. That is something that I would say over time you get better at it, understanding that sometimes it's not going to work, and that's okay, you know, and that's okay. And we're going to talk about that as well. But when it comes to that, when it comes to figuring it out, okay, what if this does not work? What we need to do is analyze that decision-making process and making sure that you're okay with the outcomes. You're okay with what happens regardless of the outcome. Okay. And how much easier would it be for you to make a decision, in this case, a hire, based off of that, based off the fact that even if it doesn't work out, you will be okay. You know, and you can extrapolate this to other facets of business and in life in general too. But that's what I call the decision matrix. So basically, when we're talking about the decision matrix, when you're trying to make a decision for yourself or for your business, you're going to answer 3 questions. First question is, what's the upside? Second is, what's the downside? And then the third question is, are you okay with the downside? Right? So what's the upside? What's the downside? And are you okay with the downside? Okay. And that's what I mean. This is a decision matrix for anything in life, for anything in business. But let's take it to this concept of being uncomfortable with hiring someone. Okay. So the downside is that after a 90-day probationary period, which, by the way, I know it may vary in different countries, but when I'm speaking, at least in the United States, I always recommend in every contract you put a 90-day probationary period. Okay. So the downside is that after this 90-day probationary period, you realize that it doesn't work out, it's not working out, and you let them go. And you gave them your energy, you gave them your time and your money, of course, but then you're back where you were before. All right. So let's say even for administrative staff, money-wise, let's say a 90 days, when you count salary, payroll, taxes, all that kind of stuff, let's say $10,000. So you invested $10,000, you invested your energy and your time, and after 90 days, you have to cut your losses. So then you ask yourself, what have you learned from the process? Because even if it didn't work out, there were still things that you've learned about maybe how to better go through the hiring process, how to find better candidates, how to maybe improve your onboarding process, how to change different things to make sure that the next hire is successful, you know, things that you could do differently moving forward. Or even for someone who worked for 90 days and it didn't work out, even if they were a dud, for lack of a better term, what has that person done that has helped you make things a little bit better during the 90 days? Because even if it didn't work out, I bet you, if you really look at it, there are still things that you can take from it that it was positive. Even like I said, if it was just you learning from your own mistakes. So then you look back and it's like, are you okay with the downside? Are you okay with the downside on this example of spending $10,000 on someone and coming out and still having to go through the hiring process once again? And hopefully you realize that by going through the decision matrix, it just takes some of the pressure of making that call, of making the decision. Because if you're okay with the downside, then there's no reason not to go for it. Okay. And then the second thing that tends to hold us back from making a hire then is a hesitation, a fear in terms of wondering, oh, am I going to have enough? for this person to do. Okay, because let's keep one thing in mind. Hiring is about finding someone who can help you solve the problem that you have. So the very first thing you need to be very, very clear is what's the problem that you're trying to solve? Because if you don't know what is the problem that you try to solve, then it is going to be a little bit of a recipe for a disaster. Because then your expectations has the potential of being very different from the expectations of the new employee. Okay, so you got to figure it out. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And then that problem should have what we call the domino effect. Okay, so for you to prioritize what is the problem that I'm trying to solve, you got to think about the domino effect, which is if you solve this one problem, how would it have a cascade of positive outcomes for your business that is going to lead you towards the next stage? All right, because you can't hire someone to solve all of your problems. That's where a lot of us make mistakes sometimes, especially when it comes to administrative staff. We suddenly overload them with so many different things to do. And we need to be clear on what are their priorities. And as an idea, there's going to be 2, maybe 3 at the most. That's going to be their focus, and everything else is going to be a bonus. It doesn't matter that they're only going to be, it doesn't mean that they're only going to be working on 2 or 3 things. What it means is that those are the main things that you're going to hold them accountable for. And then everything else is going to be icing on the cake, right? So going back to that first employee that I mentioned to you guys back in June of 2019. What happened is that I was getting very busy. I was mobile still at that point in time. I was getting very busy to the point where I was losing business because I wasn't able to keep up with inquiries, keep up with emails, keep up with people calling the business. It was stressful to try to chase medical records, try to communicate with the local veterinary clinics and everything in between. So my first hire was administrative staff for a role that I titled the client manager. And the client manager role, the top 2-3 priorities are having the phone conversation with people, but not just spilling out how much we charge, but actually building a relationship with them, listening to them, streamlining our nurturing process, which at that point was still building up because I was so busy. I wasn't able to build up a lot of our nurturing automation processes, and then organize some of our operational procedures that also were very raw because it was just me doing everything. And a lot of the procedures, actually most of the procedures were all here in my head. So those were the 3 priorities that I hired that person for. Building relationship with potential new clients, streamlining our nurturing system, and organizing our operational processes. And I was very clear to every candidate during the interview process that those were the priorities. However, there are going to be other tasks that they were going to need to get done on the day-to-day as well, until we were able to grow a little bit more and hire a more traditional front desk person per se to take some of the more minor tasks off this person's plate. All right. So first we got to figure out what is the priorities that we're trying to hire for. And then we start looking for that. And then you figure out, okay, do we have enough of them to do? Right? Very common question that I get from my students. Friend, I know I need help, but I think I'm just going to hire someone for 10 to 15 hours a week because I just don't think I have enough to hire someone for 40 hours a week. This is often what I tell them to do. Please go spend the next 45 to 60 minutes with a piece of paper and start writing down all the tasks that you can pass along to this person. Every single thing on your day, on your week, on your month that you wouldn't have to do anymore, so you can focus on seeing more patients while this person focuses on these tasks. The interesting thing is that when people do that, they write down 2, 3, 4 plus full pages of things to offload to this new hire. But what they lacked was clarity in terms of like, what are the things that I can offload to this person? But once you put down on a piece of paper, then you start seeing that, yes, actually, I have plenty of work to hire for someone for more than 10 to 15 hours a week. Because if you hire someone for 10 to 15 hours a week, they're going to get some stuff off your plate. But soon enough, like there's going to be more stuff piling up. And then guess what? You hire them for 15 hours a week, and they're, and maybe they don't want any more than that. And then suddenly you're stuck. You're stuck because you can't grow beyond that spot because you made the wrong hire, basically, because you didn't have clarity on what was the problem that you're trying to solve and what were the things that this person could do. Okay. The third thing that holds us back from making the hire is then making an emotional rather than a logical decision. Okay. And that's why I am a big stickler for those who have worked with me, me, for tracking basic metrics and key performance indicators for your business. And last month, guys, I did a training for Onlinepethealth just on that. So if you haven't watched that training, please go and do so. Because it's very important for you to have a pulse on your numbers, have a pulse on your finances. And I understand the challenge of doing all of it, in addition to, growing a business, seeing patients, doing your marketing and everything else that you need to do as a business owner. But the thing is that we can't make logical and sound decisions without having a grasp on those numbers. That's where we make emotional rather than logical decisions. And as we get busy seeing patients, I know that's one of the first things that we tend to drop is actually tracking those numbers, because it's boring, it's tedious, and we don't want to do that. We want to do the fun things. But I promise you, if there is the one thing that is going to make you more comfortable making your next hire, is actually having a grasp on your numbers, which is going to help you not only understand the finances of your business and knowing from a financial perspective, do I have enough saved up to hire this person? But then from a data and numbers and KPI perspective, in terms of like, what are the problems that I'm trying to solve with my business? Okay, because numbers don't lie, and they're going to tell you where are the holes in your business that is then going to give you guidance to help you figure out how to solve those problems. And I always say that one of our main goals as business owners should be to create problems. But actually, the key thing to keep in mind is to create problems that you want to solve. But the challenge of business owners is that we're often trying to solve problems that were thrown at us instead, which of course leads to stress, anxiety, and everything in between. Right? So for example, going back to me growing the business, I couldn't handle how many leads were coming in. Like I first focused a lot on some marketing when it was just me, hire consultants to help me set up Google ads and making sure I was getting enough leads without me having to spend a lot of my time on it, because I didn't have time to keep stopping at veterinary offices. I didn't have time to keep doing lunch and learns. I didn't have time to keep doing a lot of networking events and stuff. Why? Because I was busy seeing patients. So I worked to build a mostly automated way of getting new leads. And when I was getting a lot of these leads, I got busy. But then the problem that I needed to solve was I needed someone to build a relationship and nurture those leads. Hence, that client manager that I hired in June of 2019. Then, as that person got onboarded and stuff, caseload started to build up. I got way too busy for handling the caseload just myself. About 4 or 5 months later, hire our first canine rehabilitation therapist. Kept growing from that. COVID happened, actually, at that point, but kept growing. Opened the clinic. A few months into it, May of 2020, we kept growing despite COVID. And then what happened? Well, we needed more administrative help because that one client manager was getting overwhelmed. Hire a more traditional front desk person. And then we continue to get busy. And then in September of 2020, hired our second full-time canine rehabilitation therapist. So you can see from June of 2019 through September of 2020, so about a 15-month timeline with COVID right in the middle of it, how I was basically creating problems that I then would go on to solve. And that should be the goal of our business. Or, as a business owner. Otherwise, you're just putting up fire every single day, and that's what gets us stressed out. And then the fourth hesitation we have with hire someone then is the question that we ask ourselves is like, well, but am I going to get a good return on investment? What's the ROI? right? And that's a very common question that I get, especially when it comes to hiring administrative staff, okay? And often I feel that question comes along with administrative staff because we tend to label them as not generating revenue. So the first thing for us to understand is who generates revenue in the business. And to be quite honest, I think we need to let go of this stigma that administrative staff does not generate revenue, because they absolutely do. You just have to understand what are the cogs in the wheels of your business, right? Of course, the therapist is the one seeing the patient one-to-one, delivering the service and everything. But that return of investment that you're going to get, it's not going to be just about the money that is going to be generated with revenue, but it's going to be about the time that you as the business owner is going to buy back, that is going to allow you to focus on the things that you simply have been neglecting due to the fact that you're just so busy on the day-to-day of the business, probably seeing patients for 40 plus hours a week and trying to run your business on top of that. Okay. So that's another exercise that I often tell my mentees to do is like, what would be the projects that you would work on for the next 6 months if you had an extra 15 hours a week, right? Because I often see folks in our business have all these ideas. We have all these ideas of side projects that we want to do, maybe an online program, maybe a book we want to write, maybe start doing more for the community around us, whatever it may be. And we have this phenomenal ideas of things that we want to do, but we don't have the main thing that it's needed for us to do those things: time. And how do we get that time? By buying back. So once again, through all that process, all I was looking for was how could buy back my time. The first time around, I needed to buy my time so I could see more patients. Then the client manager came. Then I got too busy seeing patients. I needed to buy back more time by hiring another therapist so I didn't have to be seeing patients for 50 plus hours a week, so I could focus on what's next with the business, which at that point was opening a clinic and having to do a little bit more marketing, a little bit more this and that. Right. And then, especially when it came to hiring the second therapist, then it was really about buying back more time. So I could focus on what became basically now another whole business, which is my Canine PT Academy program. That's when that all started. It was because I bought back my time so I could focus on doing this project for you guys. And now more recently, over the last year, even hire a marketing coordinator so we could get more content out for you guys, could get the podcast out, could get more trainings out, webinars, resources, downloadable guides, and everything. How I was able to do that? By buying back and leveraging my time. So when you think about ROI, don't look at just the number on the bank account. That's one return on investment, but also look at your time and what can you do with it. And that may be other things that you can do to generate other revenues for the business. Or it could even just be you just stepping back a little bit and enjoying a little bit more time at home with your family too. And we don't have to feel guilty about that either. That's totally okay. There are certain periods of time over the last couple of years that was what I did, especially when my daughter was born in October of 2021. And she had to stay at the NICU for 27 days. Guess what? I had bought back my time so I could stay with her at the NICU for every single one of those days while the business was still functioning, while the business was still running. All right. And then the last thing before we talk about some numbers is, who should we hire first? That's also another common question. Who should we hire first? An administrative staff or a clinical staff? And you can make an argument either way, to be honest. But I think what we need to know is the pros and the cons of making each option. So a clinical staff, all right, it is more often than not who I hear that canine rehab therapists want to hire first. And that's not wrong, okay? We just have to understand the pros and cons. But the thought process is that, well, I can build my caseload And then I'm going to hire another therapist to offload some of that caseload. So then I can now work on the business. Financially, we feel more comfortable with that decision because that's a staff that can, quote unquote, generate revenue, like we talked earlier. And we also feel more comfortable hiring and training for that role because that's a role that we feel very comfortable ourselves, right? Because we have done this role ever since we became a canine rehab therapist. Now, the challenge, the cons on this case is going to be how you're going to grow their caseload if you're already too busy seeing your own patients. And if you manage to grow their caseload while maintaining your own, who is going to be doing the administrative tasks that now are just going to double on demand, right? So think about all the additional vet records you need to get, all the vet referrals that you might need to get, all the additional phone calls you need to do, emails you got to follow up, appointments that need to be scheduled, invoices that need to be sent, insurance receipts that need to be sent, more marketing that needs to be done, right? All this stuff that now is going to fall on you, the business owner, because you hired someone whose role was to see patients, right? And here's another very common challenge I see with that scenario, and I bet some of you guys listening to me right now are going to fall into that category, is that I see quite often canine rehab therapists build a business that relies very heavily on referrals, both word of mouth referrals and veterinary referrals that they have built the relationship over time, which is wonderful, which is great. It shows that you do a terrific job, that people keep sending you those referrals. So that's not a bad thing. The challenge with that is that then you're going to hire another canine rehab therapist, but those referrals are going to want to, for the most part, want to see you instead. So suddenly you have another clinician working with you, and but your schedule is full while they're struggling to fill their schedule. Does that sound familiar to some of you? And then here's another step that I have seen go wrong in that scenario, is that then we turn to this clinician and we start having them do some marketing, right? Whatever it may be. Oh, here, write some blog posts. Go meet this veterinary clinics. Go do this. Go do this community event. Go do that. And here's the fact. Most canine rehab therapists do not want to be doing marketing. So suddenly they were hired to solve one problem, seeing patients, and you're asking them to do a whole other problem, which is do marketing. Do you think they're going to be happy about that? They're not. And that's where then those hires can go sour. And then suddenly they do go sour. And then this business owner gets stuck thinking that, oh, I'm never going to be able to have someone else see my patients. And this is just the way it is. And then they get stuck with a business that just revolves 100% around them. And that's why, for me, I'm a big proponent of usually hiring administrative staff first. The biggest challenge of that is going to be with the planning and the finances required, because you are going to be the one seeing, you're going to be the only one seeing patients if that's your first hire. But hopefully by now you realize that there's much more beyond that. And if you plan accordingly and you know what you're hiring for, you know who you're hiring for, and you're clear about that through onboarding and training and afterwards, hopefully by now realize that it's going to be all right. And if you look at your metrics and your finances and stuff, a lot of the times we have the money to make that higher, or at least we have enough revenue coming in that we can start saving towards building up some of that cushion. But what gets in our head is the fact that when we do bring that higher, our profits going to go down, which we're going to talk a little bit about that later. And suddenly this cushion that we built, where it was kind of easy to run this business because I was just making significant more money that I was spending, might have to change a little bit. Not saying that you're going to have to spend more than you're making, but you're not going to have that big of a cushion. And that's enough for a lot of us to feel uncomfortable with if we don't have a grasp on our numbers and our finances. So that's why, guys, very important to have a good grasp on your finances. So I'll plug in it again. If you didn't watch last month's training about your metrics and everything, please go back and check that out, because it's going to be really helpful with this stuff as well. All right. So then let's talk about, can you afford it? Okay. And the way I have learned and it has worked for me, and I teach my mentees, is to basically look at two different numbers. We're going to be looking at the clinician revenue ratio, and that's for when you're hiring, of course, a clinician, someone who sees patients. And in this case, I should say, in this case, this numbers would be more about when you're hiring a PT or a DVM. If you're hiring a technician with a team, like, if you have one DVM with 2 or 3 technicians working under them as a team, then you're going to look more at the effectiveness ratio rather than the clinician revenue ratio. The clinician revenue ratio is more if your clinician is the one taking care of the whole plan of care, doing the evaluation, doing the follow-ups, doing the reassessment, and they're in charge of the whole plan of care. If not, we're going to look more at the effectiveness ratio. But let's talk about the clinician revenue ratio first. In a nutshell, what I have found for our business, because here's the thing about our field of animal rehab, we don't have real benchmarks, okay? So we need to look at traditional benchmarks from veterinary medicine, traditional benchmarks from physical therapy, and try to understand what's the business that we're trying to run and figure out what works for us, right? The traditional benchmark for veterinary medicine, for you guys who don't know, it's basically a DVM needs to be generating no more, let me rephrase that. A DVM needs to be generating revenue at least 4 times the amount that it costs you to employ them, okay? So basically, when you account for their salary and the cost of employing them, payroll, taxes, this, and that, it should be no more than 25% of the total that they're bringing to the clinic. Now, that's in a traditional veterinary medical practice where it's a very different model. If you try to mimic that number with rehab, it is never, ever, ever going to work. Why? Because we are a much more hands-on type of service. We don't make as much revenue with other things. So because of that, what I have found is that number needs to be about a third. So I would round it up a little bit to 35%. So a DVM or a physical therapist that is working with you needs to be generating in revenue about 3 times on how much it costs you to employ them, okay? Now, that's just a number, and we're also going to look at the effectiveness ratio and everything along with your metrics or your finances, you should. But you need to be clear. And also keep in mind, I don't mean that they're going to be generating that right off the bat. There's going to be a ramping up period, which that's going to vary depending on how experienced is this person that you bring in. Could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, whatever it may be, okay? But it should be about about 35%. So, for example, and I'm just keeping numbers kind of like straight, just to keep it simple, where if it costs you in salary and payroll taxes and stuff and whatnot, $100,000 to employ someone, then they need to be generating $300,000 in revenue. Does that make sense? Hopefully it does. I like rounding up just a smidge to 35%, because 1/3 would be 33%. 35% make it work, because even when you run the effectiveness ratio, you're still going to have money for your administrative staff if you keep your expenses tight. But if you start going above that, if your clinicians are pulling 40, 45, 50% of how much they're generating revenue for you, then that's when you start digging a hole. All right, so let's talk about the effectiveness ratio. So how do you calculate the effectiveness ratio? You look at it as a whole team. All your therapists, all your administrative staff, and you as well, the business owner, for the amount of time it takes you on the day-to-day of the business. Let me explain what I mean by that. So if I see patients for 50% of my time, 20 hours a week, then I would just count towards this effectiveness ratio 50% of my salary. Now, if I see patients full-time, I will count 100% on my salary, okay? Because the remainder of the salary as the business owner is going to come from another piece of the pie when we're looking at the bigger picture, okay? The effectiveness ratio, you're going to take the amount of revenue that you generate over a period of time, monthly, quarter, yearly, and you divide by how much it costs you to employ the people in your business. So you take revenue and you divide by the cost to employ your team. Okay? So keeping numbers simple, for example, if it costs you $10,000 a month in salary, taxes, healthcare benefits, and such for your staff, and your monthly revenue is $20,000 a month, you take 20,000, you divide by 10,000, your effectiveness ratio is of 2. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense. So then what should be a potential good benchmark in our industry for you to aim for when it comes to this? Now, keep in mind that it's going to be very, very hard for you to run a business where no more than 40 to 45% of your revenue is going towards payroll and benefits and taxes and stuff. Why? Once again, because we are a service business. Even traditional veterinary medicine, the benchmark for everyone is 45% for a reason. So it's going to be very hard for us to go below that. Okay? If you can keep between 45 to 55%, you're in a good spot. And then we're going to go, if you go above that, it can be okay as long as you're not pushing that too hard. So how does the effectiveness ratio or ER account into that? So if you have an ER of 2.5, you're basically doing amazing. Okay. An ER of 2.5 means that about 40% of your revenue is going towards paying your staff. And with that, you're probably generating a good 20%, maybe even close to 25% in profit. And I mean true profit. That's the profit that I meant earlier that you take as the business owner. And then it's up to you to do whatever you want with that money. Some of it maybe reinvest back into the business. Some of it you take it home with you as the business owner, as you should. Some of it you invest. Some of it you save for future investments with the business. Whatever it is. You can run at a 2.5, but it's hard to do that sustainably in the long run, right? Because at one point or another, you're going to have to buy back your time somehow. But 2.5, you're doing amazing. Then you can get to an ER of 2, which for simple math is 50%, right? That's 50% of your revenue over a period of time, monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever you're looking at, going towards paying your staff. And that's probably the most comfortable benchmark to be at, because your business is still going to be doing very well. You're still going to be pulling a good 10 to 15% profit after paying yourself as the therapist. And you're going to have good systems, good staff in place kind of stuff, and paying them a good wage, basically, right? Because that's another pet peeve of mine. It's like, why do we think that it's okay to underpay staff, right? Like, there is money to be made in the field of canine rehab, guys. We just have to know how to allocate that money, and everyone can be happy about it. So that ER of 2 keeps you at about 50%. Very, very good job. Keep at it. Then you can get closer to an ER of 1.75, which means that you are at about 55, close to 60% of your revenue going towards cost of staff. It's doable, but that's what I call the yellow alert, because you don't want to get any dip below that, basically, because at that point, you can still be making a little bit of a profit, or at the very least, you're breaking even, depending on what are your other fixed expenses, how much is your rent, how much you're spending on other equipment that you bought, payments that you have, and this and that. It can still break down. Now, if you start getting above 60% of your total revenue going towards staff, then we're going to get to the red alert phase. That red alert phase at 1.5 means that something needs to be fixed ASAP, because it's not going to be sustainable over the long run. At 1.5 is basically somewhere around 65, even close to 70% of your revenue going towards payroll. That's just not sustainable. Not only you're not going to be making a profit as a business owner, you're going to be losing money, because when you account for other expenses like rent, utilities, all the other costs of goods for the business, the softwares that you're going to need to have, the marketing that you're going to need to spend on, and this and that, it is going to get you above the 100%. Okay. So that's why it's important to have a track on your numbers. And that's why these 2 numbers are very important for you to have a general idea about, to know where you're at with it. Now, the last thing I would say is keeping in mind that also that number is just a snapshot on what is happening at that particular point of time in your business. And that number doesn't always tell the whole story. Okay. So, for example, if you just hired a brand new canine rehab therapist and they're still not seeing patients on their own, or they're just starting to, and your ER is 1.75 ish or so, but that's because of that. And you know that in 3 months, this person is going to be picking up their caseload, and then you're going to build it back up, then that's okay. Why? Because that's part of the plan. That's part of that growth period. And you can go back to the training we did a couple months ago, that it was about that. It was about the growth valleys with the business. And I talked a little bit about that when it gets to you growing the business, it is going to take a little bit of a hit on your profit. And that's what this number kind of like shows. But as long as you have a plan, as long as there's a reason behind it, and you are on track to get back on it, then that's okay. So that's what I mean. Yes, the numbers are good, but the numbers don't tell the story of the business. So you got to combine both, right? It's just like us as clinicians, for example, looking at an X-ray or looking at an MRI, right? Yes, that tells us what's going on with that patient from that aspect, but we need to relate those findings with our clinical findings during the evaluation. Otherwise, what we see on the X-ray can be meaningless, right? How many times you have seen a hip so arthritic on the X-ray that we're like, oh my God, how is this patient even getting around? And then you see the patient and they're doing fine for the most part. So you got to relate the X-ray findings with the clinical findings. Just the same way you got to relate this financial numbers with the findings of your business, the story of where your business is at today. All right. So I hope that was helpful, guys. If you need any more resources, please check out our website, caninePTacademy.com, our podcast, the Canine PT Academy podcast, business lessons for canine rehabilitation therapists. And if you have any questions, don't ever hesitate to reach out to me either by email, Francisco, Francisco, at thecaninept.com. Or you can always reach out to me on social media, and whichever way it's easy for you guys. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Megan Kelly and the Online Pet Health team, for another opportunity to be teaching you guys some of the business stuff.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified every time I load a new podcast. I'm here every week talking to vet rehab therapists from all over the world about all things vet rehab. A big thanks to our sponsor, Paw Prosper. Their sponsorship allows us to be able to give this podcast to you for free, so please go and check them out at pawprosper.com. Don't forget to bookmark the next Vet Rehab Summit on Saturday, the 8th of November, 2025. Come and be a part of the world's largest online veterinary rehabilitation conference created specifically for you, the vet rehabber community. Online Pet Health members get VIP complimentary access to the Vet Rehab Summit. For more information about continuing education for vet rehabbers, you can go to onlinepethealth.com.